Okay, picture this. You're 28. You've got a solid job. Maybe you're pulling in 70,000 rupees or even a lakh a month. By your parents' standards, you've arrived. You've got the latest phone, you're hitting the gym, and you've even done that one mandatory trip to Bali. And yet, this is the part we don't discuss at family dinners. At the end of every month, you're broke. It's the 28th, you check your bank balance, and it's just double digits. You aren't buying luxury cars or yachts, you're just paying your rent, your EMIs, and ordering a bit too much from Zomato. You tell yourself, next month I'll start an SIP. But next month comes and the cycle repeats. What is actually going on? I'm Rohan, and I spend way too much time thinking about why smart, educated, hardworking young Indians are somehow broker than their parents were at the same age, despite earning more in absolute terms. If you're someone who feels like no matter how much you make, financial security keeps feeling just slightly out of reach, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today we are going to get into something that I think most personal finance content in India completely misses. Everyone wants to talk about SIPs and index funds. And look, we'll get there. I love a good index fund conversation. But before we talk about solutions, I think we need to be brutally honest about the actual problem. And the actual problem is much deeper, much more structural, and honestly much more interesting than stop buying coffee. Here's what most people don't realize. The financial struggle of millennials and Gen Z in India is not primarily a discipline problem. It is not a knowledge problem. It is a structural timing problem layered on top of a psychological trap that the entire consumer economy has spent billions of rupees engineering specifically for you. And once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. Let's start with the math, because the math alone should make you sit up. In 2001, the average price of a 2 BHK apartment in a Tier 1 Indian city, let's say Bangalore, was roughly 15 to 18 lakh rupees. The average salary of a fresh engineering graduate at that time was somewhere around 1.5 to 2 lakh rupees per annum. So that apartment cost roughly 8 to 10 times the annual salary of a new graduate. Uncomfortable but manageable with family support and a few years of saving. Fast forward to 2026, that same 2 BHK in a decent locality in Bangalore, we are talking 80 lakh rupees on the very low end. More realistically, 1.2 to 1.5 crore rupees if you want something that doesn't require a 2-hour commute. And the starting salary of a fresh engineering graduate today? According to the All India Council for Technical Education's 2025 placement data, the median salary, not the top 10%, the median is around 3.5 to 4.5 lakh rupees per annum. Some sectors like IT have seen better, but we are talking about the median here. So do that math with me. In 2001, an apartment cost roughly 8 to 10 times the annual salary. In 2026, that same apartment costs 25 to 35 times the annual salary. Housing has gotten roughly 3 times more expensive relative to income in a single generation. 3 times. And we're sitting here wondering why millennials and Gen Z can't seem to get ahead. This is where it gets really interesting and a little uncomfortable, because this is just one asset class. Let's talk about education, since that's supposed to be the ticket to financial freedom, right? In 2005, a decent private engineering college in India charged somewhere between 30,000 to 80,000 rupees per year in fees. Today, according to the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, private engineering and management college fees have increased at roughly 8 to 12% annually over 2 decades. A 4-year BTech program at a reputable private institution today costs anywhere from 8 lakh to 25 lakh rupees total. An MBA from a good private B school, you're looking at 15 to 35 lakh rupees. And here's the brutal part. The salary premium you earn from these degrees has not kept pace with inflation. The RBI's 2025 annual report on household finances noted that education loan NPAs, that's non-performing assets, basically loans that aren't being repaid on time, have been climbing steadily, which tells you something really real about whether these degrees are paying off at the rate people expected. So you've got a generation that took on more debt to get educated than any generation before them, entered a job market where wages have not kept pace with asset price inflation, and is now trying to build wealth in an economy where the assets that actually build wealth, property, equity, starting a business, have become exponentially more expensive relative to their income. And then some uncle at a family function has the audacity to say, "Yeah, why can't you just save up and buy a flat like we did?" Uncle, with all due respect, the math doesn't math anymore. But here's where I want to push back on myself a little bit because I don't want this to become a helplessness video. Because the structural problem is real, but it is not the whole story. There is something else happening, something psychological that is making an already difficult situation significantly worse. And this part, unlike the housing market, is something you actually have control over. Let me tell you about a concept called lifestyle inflation, but I want to tell it in a way that actually makes sense for 2026 India, because the standard "don't upgrade your lifestyle" advice is too simplistic. Here's the thing. Lifestyle inflation isn't just about wanting a bigger flat or a fancier car. In 2026, lifestyle inflation is almost invisible because it's been digitized and subscriptionified and normalized at every single income level. Think about what a normal middle-class life looks like for a 25 to 32-year-old urban Indian professional today. You've got your streaming subscriptions, let's say conservatively 1500 rupees a month for 2 or 3 platforms, which feels like nothing. You've got your food delivery because after a 9 or 10-hour workday, cooking feels impossible. Let's say 4,000 to 6,000 rupees a month, and I'm being conservative. You've got your gym or fitness app, your Spotify or Apple Music, your cloud storage, maybe a productivity tool or two for that side project you keep meaning to work on. You've got your data plan, probably 400 to 700 rupees a month. You've got Ola or Uber because rickshaws aren't always available and the metro doesn't go everywhere. You've got the occasional weekend brunch because honestly you deserve it after the week you've had. You've got birthday dinners, farewell parties. It's just one wedding, travel, and none of these individual things feel extravagant. Each one in isolation is completely reasonable. But add them up and you are easily spending 15 to 25,000 rupees a month. That's 1.8 to 3 lakh rupees a year on what you would classify as just existing. Not saving, not investing, just the baseline cost of modern urban Indian life. And here's the psychological trap at the center of all of this. Every single one of these products and services has been designed by incredibly smart people with access to behavioral economics research to feel like a need rather than a want. The food delivery apps know exactly when you're most tired and most likely to order. The streaming platforms know that the autoplay feature will keep you watching past the point you intended. The fast fashion brands know that a 799 rupees price point hits the sweet spot where your brain doesn't engage the "is this a significant purchase" filter. This isn't an accident, it is design, and the people designing these systems are not rooting for your financial independence. They are optimizing for your continued spending. Now, you might be thinking, okay Rohan, this is all very dramatic, but I know this already. I know that I spend money on things I don't need. The problem is, I don't earn enough to save meaningfully even when I try to cut back. And look, I hear you. For someone earning 35,000 to 50,000 rupees a month in a metro city, which is where a huge chunk of young Indian professionals are, after rent, which could easily be 12,000 to 20,000 rupees for a shared flat, after food, after transportation, after the absolute basics, the math is genuinely tight. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that 3 coffees a week is the reason you can't buy a house. That would be insulting. The systemic pressures are real. But here's what I want you to understand about the psychology of this moment, because this is the part that actually changes behavior. There are 2 types of financial pain. There's the pain of discipline, which is choosing not to spend on something today because of a future you're building, and there's the pain of regret, which is looking back in 10 years and realizing that the incremental, invisible spending of your 20s cost you the compounding decade that could have changed everything. The pain of discipline is acute. You feel it immediately. You feel it when you're at the restaurant and you order water instead of the mocktail. You feel it when your friends are booking the Goa trip and you're doing that mental calculation. Regret, on the other hand, is deferred. It comes later, much later, and by then the window for maximum compounding impact has closed. Here's the number that I think should genuinely change how you feel about early investing. And I know everyone says this, but sit with the math for a second. If a 23-year-old invests 5,000 rupees a month in a reasonably diversified equity mutual fund and earns an average of 12% annual returns, which is roughly what the Nifty 50 has delivered over 20-year rolling periods, according to NSE data for 2025 to 26, by the time they're 45, that 5,000 rupees a month becomes approximately 64 lakh rupees. Not 5,000 rupees compounded forever, just 5,000 rupees a month for 22 years, 64 lakh rupees. Now take the same person who waits until 30 to start, Same 5,000 rupees a month, same 12% returns, but they only have 15 years until 45. Their corpus? Roughly 25 lakh rupees, less than half. Those 7 years of waiting cost them 39 lakh rupees, 39 lakh rupees. Not because they invested less money, they invested significantly less in total, but the compounding gap is still that stark. The mathematical advantage of starting early is not a motivational poster. It is arithmetic. This is where it gets really interesting, and this is the part that nobody in the Indian personal finance space wants to say out loud because it's a little politically uncomfortable. The wealth gap between millennials and Gen Z versus older generations in India is not just about discipline or even systemic factors in isolation. It's about what economists call the asset price escalation trap. Here's how it works. The generation that owned property and equity before 2010, let's call them the early asset acquirers, benefited from something extraordinary. Indian real estate went up 5 to 7 times in most major cities between 2000 and 2015. The Sensex went from around 3,000 in 2001 to over 30,000 by 2017. If you owned assets in that window, wealth came to you almost passively. You didn't need to be a genius, you just needed to have gotten in. And a lot of that generation did, often with family support, often before prices became this punishing. What this created is a structural divide. Not between rich and poor in the traditional sense, but between those who got into assets early and those who didn't. And the people who didn't, the young, the first-generation wealth builders, the ones without family property to inherit, are now trying to build wealth starting from the current prices rather than benefiting from the appreciation. And the people who did, a lot of them are now landlords charging rents that consume 40 to 50% of a young professional's take-home salary, while also offering financial advice about saving more. The irony is almost poetic. According to Knight Frank's 2025 Wealth Report India edition, the top 1% of Indian wealth holders saw their net worth grow by an average of 14% in the last 2 years. The median Indian household's real income, adjusted for inflation, which has been running between 4.5 and 6% according to the Ministry of Statistics Consumer Price Index data for 2025 to 26, grew by roughly 2 to 3% in real terms. You are not imagining the widening gap. The data confirms it. So, what do we actually do about this? Because I refuse to make a video that ends with, "The system is rigged, good luck." That is not helpful. Here's what I actually believe, having spent a significant amount of time in this space. First, you have to make peace with the reality that your wealth-building playbook cannot be your parents' playbook. The save for 10 years and buy a flat and cash strategy is dead for most urban millennials and Gen Z unless you have exceptional income or inheritance. And that's not a character flaw. That's mathematics. The flat that your parents saved up for in a decade now requires 25 to 30 years of equivalent saving at equivalent income levels. Chasing that goal the traditional way may mean sacrificing your 30s and 40s for a goal that was designed for a different economic era. Instead, consider this shift: equity first, property later. Build your equity corpus through systematic investing. SIPs in diversified index funds are genuinely one of the most accessible wealth-building tools ever created for someone without capital. And let that corpus work towards your real estate aspiration, rather than the other way around. Second, and this one is uncomfortable, stop optimizing for the wrong number. Most young Indians are optimizing for their salary, which makes sense because salary is a flow, not a stock. What you earn matters far less than what you keep and what your money does while you sleep. According to SEBI's investor data for 2025, India crossed 11 crore registered mutual fund investors, which sounds impressive until you realize that the median SIP amount is still under 2,000 rupees per month and the average holding period is under 3 years. People are investing, but they're investing too little and exiting too early. Both of those behaviors destroy the compounding effect completely. A 2,000 rupee SIP isn't a plan, it's a gesture. The minimum threshold where SIPs start to meaningfully impact your financial trajectory in a metro Indian city is probably 8,000 to 10,000 rupees per month. I know that sounds a lot, which brings me to the third point. Here's what most people don't realize about income enhancement versus expense cutting. In the specific economic moment of 2026 India, where the services sector is enormous, where remote work has opened up international income opportunities, where the creator economy and gig economy are both real and paying, your income ceiling is genuinely more flexible than any previous generation has ever had access to. Expense cutting has a hard floor. You cannot cut below zero. But income can compound. A second income stream of even 10,000 to 15,000 rupees a month, freelancing, consulting, content creation, tutoring, selling a digital product, invested consistently over a decade becomes 23 to 35 lakh rupees at 12% returns. That is the math of a second income stream. And in 2026, the barrier to building one is historically low. Now, you might be thinking, Rohan, easier said than done. I'm already exhausted from my primary job. And look, that's real. Burnout is real. The hustle culture toxicity is real. I'm not asking you to work yourself into the ground. What I'm asking you to do is think about your financial architecture, which is a 10-hour project, not a 10-year project. Block one weekend, sit with your actual numbers, not the numbers you think you're spending, the actual numbers from your bank statements. Calculate the gap between what you earn, what you keep, and what you need to invest to hit your actual financial goals. Most people have never done this exercise with full honesty and full specificity. Most people are flying financially blind and then wondering why they keep nearly missing things. And finally, I want to say something about the psychological weight of all of this, because I think it's genuinely underappreciated in financial education content. The reason so many millennials and Gen Z in India feel a particular kind of financial anxiety that is different from what their parents felt is not just about the numbers, it's about the narrative gap. There was a social contract offered to this generation. Study hard, get a good degree, get a stable job, the rest will follow. And a lot of people did everything right according to that contract, and the rest has not followed in the way that was promised. And that is disorienting. That disorientation, that sense of having done everything right and still feeling behind can manifest as either paralysis or recklessness. Either you give up on financial planning because it feels hopeless, or you YOLO into crypto or FNO trading because at least it feels like agency. According to SEBI's 2025 study on derivatives trading, over 1.13 crore individual traders participated in equity FNO segments, and approximately 93% of them made a net loss. 93%! The lottery mentality when applied to financial markets is not a wealth-building strategy, it is a wealth destruction strategy dressed up in the language of empowerment. Here's the thing. The generation that built wealth in India's last major economic expansion largely did it through patience, through ownership of assets, through resisting the pull of consumer lifestyle escalation at a time when that pull was much less engineered and aggressive than it is today. The generation that will build wealth through India's next major economic expansion and India's economic trajectory over the next 20 years is genuinely one of the most compelling macro stories in the world, with IMF projections maintaining 6.3 to 6.8% real GDP growth through the decade. That generation will do it by understanding that the rules have changed, by building equity positions systematically and early, by treating their income as a tool rather than an identity, and by refusing to let a consumer economy that profits from their financial anxiety convince them that spending is the same as living. You are not behind because you are weak. You are not behind because you are not disciplined. You are not behind because you didn't listen to enough finance podcasts. You are navigating a genuinely more complex financial landscape than any generation before you, with less family wealth safety net, higher asset prices relative to income, and more sophisticated psychological pressure to spend. Acknowledging that is not an excuse. It's accurate, and accuracy is where strategy starts. But here is what I need you to hear, and I want this to land the right way. Structural disadvantage is real, and it is also not your final answer. Because the people who will look back in 2040 and say they built something, they will not be the people who had the easiest starting conditions. They will be the people who understood the game as it actually is, not as it was sold to them, who started investing something even if it felt embarrassingly small, who built a second income before they needed one, who bought the first unit trust before they could afford the flat, who held through the market corrections when every WhatsApp group was screaming that the economy was collapsing. Those people are building wealth right now in this exact economic environment, and the gap between them and everyone else will be visible and enormous by 2035. The question is simply which side of that gap you want to be on. And the answer to that question starts not next month, not after the next appraisal, not after things settle down. It starts with what you do with this information today. I'll be in the comments. Tell me which part of this hit hardest for you. And if you want me to do a deep dive on any of these specific topics, the FNO trap, building a second income stream in India in 2026, what a realistic first investment portfolio looks like on a 50,000 rupees salary, let me know. Subscribe, give this a thumbs up if it was useful, and I'll see you in the next one.